Well, welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. My name is Aljamal Binder. I'm the chair of the board of Movement Omaha for Race Equity. And today we have a kind of unusual presentation or a program. Uh, I am going to be talking about a book with Karen Abrams, who's the treasurer of the board, and she's very much involved in social justice issues and reading. And so this is a book that she recommended. We're going to talk a little bit about this book, the first part, and then open it up because it has a lot of relationships what we're experiencing, I think, in this country. It's a fascinating book and uh, really, I think, drives home a lot of points that happen in Russia and so on. So, like I say, it's a very powerful book, fascinating. I find it very intriguing. Karen, did you want to start and share a few things here?
Sure. The title of the book is The Future's History: How Totalitarianism Reclaimed Russia. The author of the book is Masha Gessen, and Masha Gessen's a prominent Russian-American journalist, currently living in New York, also author, translator, known for their reporting on authoritarianism, politics, LGBTQIA plus issues and rights. The book was published in 2017. It won the National Book Award for Nonfiction. And again, I want to say the title one more time because The Future is History: How Totalitarianism Reclaimed Russia is the premise of the book. That Russian society has been fundamentally traumatized, permanently disabled by decades of totalitarianism and authoritarian rule, and that consequently, during the 1990s, when Russia had a brief flirtation with democracy when it was part of the Soviet Union, that couldn't last. Gessen is basically saying that Russian society is permanently disabled, and so there wasn't really any possible future other than being reclaimed by totalitarianism.
And the thing I want to kind of give an overview quickly of the book also, it's focused on four Russian people born in the 1980s. They also focus on the head of the Putin, who is his rise to power. Found that fascinating. And also it talks about the struggle of democracy and the long history and the various different leaderships. I think she does a good job of articulating the different leaders and their style and so on. And the number of the violent incidents, I think, was really high in the book for me. Some things they went through just by protesting and so on. I also found the book intriguing in the sense that it showed me a lot of violence in the Russian society by the government, police officers, and so on. Again, as an African American, it reminds me of the local police department here in Omaha, where they kill people and get away with it and call it justifiable homicide. But again, just the way the people in leadership, the ICE situations happened in Minnesota, it had a lot of parallel in the book. Also, I think she does a great job of summarizing the book just about the role of religion plays or not play in that country, related back to Marxism and so on. And just some of the theories and issues that we need to know about issues related to totalitarianism, fascism, and all those kind of things that hold people back. And somewhat I got was how insular the country was. I didn't know that. Again, it reminds me of the situations here for many people who are locked out. But fascinating book and something worth looking at, considering it. I think we're going to probably write a book review on it and kind of go into that. But I think what we want to do is Ken and I are going to go back and forth with some questions or things to each other that we're going to ask each other and give some observations and then open it for other people to share that. And again, one of the things that we got from reading the book is how we can relate it to other countries and including here. And sometimes we see books written like this, we think, okay, it's only about that country. But when you're a good writer, it makes it a universal theme and so on. It just found it fascinating that there were some things in the book that was just let's say it was intriguing. The other thing I
Yeah.
found fascinating is that she's a Russian national and her control of English here, she writes very well. I mean, she's been here for a while, but her bilingual ability is great for someone who their first language is not English. So I want to start there. So Karen, I maybe want to start asking you a question. We can go back and forth.
Okay.
What struck you when you were reading the book? What really hit you, or we would say the aha epiphany, the book? And by the way, how did you pick that book up? Because I have to give credit. You're the one who recommended it to me and so on. But yeah, what made you get this book
Yeah.
of all books?
Actually, it was the title. I didn't know anything about Masha Gessen and not that much about Putin's, history and what he's done and since the 90s and in Russia. So I don't know if I had heard something on a podcast. I actually don't remember what made me decide to buy it, but I felt like it was going to reflect some lessons for me on what's happening in the United States today. So getting to your question about what were some of the things that struck me about the book? Like you, I really enjoyed how Gessen uses stories of real people that we follow throughout the book. And we get to know these people, we get to understand their actions. We see how the Putin regime responds to them, oppresses them, both directly and indirectly, and how it affects them, their families, their loved ones. And because of the way Gessen writes, we relate to this group of people, and it makes what happens to them really relatable and understandable. So I loved that way of writing history. I thought that was really unique and interesting.
Mm.
And then the the book also was potent because not very far in, I was already thinking, oh my God, Putin's Russia is like a primer for the Trump administration. And things, themes that Gessen talks about, like the weaponizing of nostalgia. When I think about those MAGA hats, the whole idea of MAGA, make America great again, we're literally at war with Iran right now because we have nostalgia for trying to dominate the Middle East in this country,
Mhm.
right? Um, what this move to get women out of the workplace, back into the bedroom and out of the boardroom, the scapegoating of minorities. Um, that's a big theme in the book. And so we're experiencing that now. ICE raids, 24 new prison camps that have been built across or purchased or rented across the United States to hold immigrants. And, all I can think is, okay, this is the beginning of concentration camps, right? Who's next? Who's next after the immigrants? There's a lot of people that are in line to get into those camps, I bet. Um, Another theme that Gessen talks about is this whole war on history, on knowledge. And it seemed like, from Gessen's perspective, in Russia, what Putin was trying to do was destroy the educational fields of sociology, psychology, and history. We're doing it slightly differently here. It's just about outright destroying and revising history of Black people, of Native Americans. We're removing references to genocide, to slavery, Jim Crow. Just get that stuff off the walls, get the signs
So Karen,
down.
when you say that, we're talking about the University of Nebraska, Omaha, we're talking about education institutions, the public schools, all of them are guilty of whitewashing diversity and historical issues of people of color, particularly those who've been fighting for these issues for many years. And Russia has
Mhm.
done it for many years, but we're starting to see more under this present regime.
Yeah, yeah. And so those were the those were the parts of the book that just kind of grabbed me by the neck and shook me and said, "Okay, you got to listen to this. You got to listen to this." I also liked the title, "The Future is History," and I'm wondering, what does that mean to you, Ajmal, when you heard that? The future is history.
Well, I come from an African-centric point of view where the past, the present, and the future are all combined through our ancestors. And so, what she does is she lays out some breadcrumbs of how their situation in the totalitarian country and the fascism has evolved. And as I was looking at the book, again, I want to come back to something I asked you, that what struck me about the book was, number one, she's a lesbian, and she goes through some of her challenges they face in Russia, and I didn't see that until toward the latter part of the year, because she kind of didn't talk about sexual orientation towards the latter part of the book. But I actually had a chance to see her on a YouTube, and she really does a good job articulating that how they got tortured and beat up and killed and stuff. And it's a very repressive in that country the way they have treated black people in this country. So I didn't know that it was that
Mhm.
mean spirited. You read about our filtered news, and Trump uses the word fake news for black folks. We always consider it fake news because we're not in it. And then the other
Mhm.
thing I think, going back to that title, is that we cannot ignore our past because of the conditions of present or future. And you can almost predict the stupidity in our systems. Again, if you educate people to be docile and the stuff that we have in Omaha, you got these GED people running these nonprofits who don't know how to read and write. Her book shows me that. And I think the book is an excellent metaphor, an excellent breadcrumbs to show you can just take some of the names out and put Omaha, Nebraska in there because we have some of the same experience with the Trinity who runs this city.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, I think that when we think about how this book is important to an organization like MORE, where we focus on racial equity and we focus on trying to um, really change some of the rules, change the way institutions are dealing with race and racism. I think this book is a very interesting look at ourselves through what happened and is happening in Russia. What moved you most in this book?
Number one, I would say definitions. She was clear in helping me to understand what authoritarianism, fascism, and how it's translated into what we see coming out of Washington. We got Supreme Court, Congress, basically kowtowing to the president for his silly things, and again when he ignores the rule of law. And so, again, we look at history, what has happened, and we think, okay, that won't happen here. And I
Yeah,
remember when I was visiting Botswana and South Africa years ago before Trump, right as Trump was running for office, I said it could never happen in the United States. Not knowing we got the double whammy, we got, the orange man in office, and you got people afraid to speak out. I mean, again, that's another thing that I think that resonated, again, of the terminology and how you think it doesn't apply to us. And as we look in terms of what's happening in the Middle East, we're looking in terms of what's happening in Bosnia, we're looking at terms of happening elsewhere, Rwanda, and you sometimes think it'll never happen here, even the fact of
yeah,
invading other countries. So those are
yeah,
things that I think we got to see the connection is of all of us on this globe.
yeah. I one of the hardest things for me every day is reading the news because it's like being traumatized every single day. And one of the things that Masha Gessen talks about a lot is that one of the sort of rules of authoritarianism is to normalize the shocking, so that um, that's what's really happening with when shocking events occur in such close succession every single day. Our our public capacity or the capacity of the public to be alarmed is, exhausted. So, as you mentioned earlier on, we're already normalized to Black and brown people's death by police, and now it's becoming institutionalized through ICE and the killings of now two pretty good white people on top of that in Minneapolis, the legal observer Alex Pretty and the protester Renee Good. So uh, it is the normalization of the shocking
Mm.
that I think really reflects some of the definition of authoritarianism, part of the definition of authoritarianism.
Karen, just a quick point. I was talking to Ben Salazar. We're going to have him on the program coming up in the next few weeks. And he told me, and he mentioned the person's name, and I reached out. The person hasn't got back to me. I don't know if they want me to interview, but he said this person, biracial person, has start carrying a passport because she's afraid ICE is going to pick her up in Omaha and take her to some other place. I'm like, you got to be kidding. And so I met another person who's going to be on the show, and she said she also carries her passport everywhere. She's light
Mm,
skinned and she could be mistaken for a Puerto Rican or a Mexican American and so on. And I'm like, how do we live in a society where you got to carry a passport around like they did the pass books in South Africa and or driver's license. They make you pull that out when you're not even committing a crime. So again, that's something we just got to push back on, because we shouldn't have ICE in our community or anybody demanding your identity when you have done nothing wrong.
Mhm. Um, let's see. I'm just seeing a question here from, is this the only question? Maybe we missed some. No, from Cynthia. I mentioned 4 people born at the dawn of democracy. Not sure what Cynthia is talking about. Do you know what she's
Well,
talking
we'll
about?
open it up when we get to that part,
Okay.
Karen. We
Okay.
usually, this is the
Okay.
part we kind of interact
Oh,
there
yes.
under
I
that part.
forgot you've got your way of doing things.
Yeah,
Cynthia,
we do the
we'll
first
come
half,
back
and
to your
then we do,
question.
yeah, we do our questions here, and then we'll open it up to her and let other people
So
weigh in.
sorry about that, Cynthia. I forgot that Ajmal's got his methods here. Um, so one of the things, we talking a little bit about how Putin's Russia is a model for authoritarianism that we can learn from, and maybe the Trump administration is learning from. And another piece of that, we talked about several things already, normalizing the shocking, the war on history, scapegoating minorities. But there's also this cult of personality, the way that Trump puts all of those huge posters of himself looking very fierce on a lot of the public buildings. There's about 10 portraits of him in the White House and that sort of thing. Um, I'm speaking of the cult of personality, Ajmal. I'm wondering, how does the cult of personality potentially undermine our success or success of organizations like ours in achieving the end of racism?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Karen. And one of the reasons I use the word and understand that concept is means you center around a person's leadership. And
Mhm.
again, I almost sometimes see the cult of person as a narcissistic personality, where if they're not around, the group dissipates and so on. And good examples would maybe be like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or any of the great leaders, where if they disappear, the movement dies. And again, uh, when these were narcissism, I'm using where they get too much attention, like in the president's case, where he's got everybody sucking up to him and praising him. And I understand he even buy shoes for his staff members so they can wear the same kind of shoes like he's in Russia. I assume his wife from Eastern Europe may impact him a little bit too, because when he traveled, he liked North Korea and he liked all those kind of dictatorships. But I can't understand the guy going off on the deep end and some of the stuff he do. But the code of personality basically says the leadership controls it, and when that leadership disappears, the whole organization fragment. A good example would be Iran. When they got rid of the head honcho, they had all these other echelons and tentacles throughout their system. They're still able to continue as a country to occupy and deal with some of the issues within their manifest of their constitution, how they behave. The other thing I think about the cult of personality is that we got to be careful that it's about we and us and not I and me. And we got a lot of those kind of people in our community where they think that they are the organization. I've criticized organizations over the years, and some people take it as a personal attack. I talk about Charles Yu, where the director told me he's on 7 different boards. I mean, are you serious? How do you run an organization and you think you are the leadership or you're on all these boards? It's obvious something's not happening at your ranch. So I call them out specifically looking at this book, because we can fall into the cult of personality, think we're all this, and we again think that $1 million organization, Habitat's another one. They're all related, where the leader controls everything, and everything has to be about addressing the edification of that leader.
Interesting.
So,
Uh,
Cynthia, let me switch up and ask you a different kind of a question, because I think part of the thing that I want to dive into, and you and I talked a little bit about this a bit. In the book, she's Jewish, and she's also she talked about going to Israel, so on, and we're dealing with some issues right now that's going in the Middle East. But the Jewish people are a religious minority in Russia and have called hell there over the years, and she talks about that. And my question back to you, in terms of your experience in dealing with that, uh, how did that shape her experience from your point? Now, I heard you use the word good Jew one time, and most of us don't know this concept of secular Jew or an atheistic Jew. So, can you explain that? Because in the book, she talks about that a little bit.
yeah. Um, so I think that um, anti-Semitism. Masha, it's sort of complicated in her whole family trauma and family history for Masha Gessen because her grandparents were Holocaust survivors, or at least her grandmother was. I think her grandfather too, if I recall correctly, or their grandfather. I'm getting their pronouns wrong. But really, she was not, Masha Gessen, when she was young, was not particularly religious, and I think became agnostic or an atheist, and I don't even exactly remember. But one of the stories that I do remember from the book is when Masha was trying to get into grad school and just couldn't even get in to take the test. I mean, it was like there was this policy, this unwritten but political policy of not letting Jews take the test to get into grad school. There was,
And this is in the Soviet Union, Russia.
this was in Russia
Well,
post,
kind of
yeah.
like they did black people here in the past and even
Mhm.
today. You can't get in certain programs because you're black.
Yeah. And what I did find interesting was the way that she talked about um also the sort of the alcoholism of so many Russians. And I think it's all kind of connected together
Hmm.
in this idea of societal stress, oppression, lack of economic opportunities, lack of access to mental health resources. And so the oppression comes in all forms. It comes in very concrete forms that you can't take the test, and it comes in the street. The one story that I just remember, it's like the streets being destroyed and then built and then destroyed again and then built again. It's like you can't,
Well,
nothing
are
makes
you talking
any
about
sense.
Omaha or Russia? Help me with
This
this
was
one.
in Russia. This was
Oh,
one of the
okay.
stories
It
that
sounds
Masha
like Omaha now. Okay, go ahead. They keep destroying it, put the barricades out for 2 months out before they even start working on them. Lazy bums. Taking my tax dollars. Really, go ahead. I interrupted you.
So I just think that these environmental stressors and then the anti-Semitism that was part of sort of the normal fabric of society in Russia and still is in a lot of places.
Mhm.
I think that causes historical and lived trauma
Yeah.
for people. That is, all of that contributes to what she talks about as this quality of the Russian personality, just sort of being stuck in a victim mode or survivor mode.
Right. As you mentioned, the alcoholism and drugs and so on, it relates to black folks who have a higher percentage of proportion of buying alcohol for their group size, say with Native Americans over the years, particularly white clay that happened in Nebraska. And again, when you've been traumatized and you've had your history stolen and you've been given second class status, you don't get any good education jobs. And we sometimes blame the victims in this society when the system is set up. For example, go to Douglas County. How many African Americans in City Hall have worked in key positions? We got a mayor who just took over and he kept all the same old incompetent people in his administration. And again, we want to get the people out, but in Russia, it shows us a lot of cronyism like we have here. It's just that we hide it a little bit better. You go into the medical center, you see the same old faces. You think you're in apartheid South Africa. So if people have been historically traumatized, it's hard for
Mhm.
them to go out and do the stuff that
Yes.
normal people do. And I think she spells it out very well. And so you feel sorry for the Russian people and the alcoholism. But again, we can relate to that in Omaha, Nebraska. We have disproportionate number of spirits in our community.
And you're bringing up that social trauma that you and I have talked about um, as it reflects on racism. Does she talk about that, do you think, in a different way, or does Masha talk about that in a different way in the book, or is it the same kind of issue that we've talked about, historical trauma?
I,
What do
you know,
you
I,
think?
Karen, I think what I got from the book, and again, when you read The Warmth of the Other Sun, where she writes about the migration of black people from the South, Isabel Wilkerson, it's like that book where there's a universality. You see this book, you see yourself in it, but you just have to change your names. The
Mhm.
characters are the same, like Dragnet, protect the innocent. But uh, I think it's there. And I think that's what made me gravitate to reading it more in depth and even following up on the face on YouTube, because I think that's the essence of what this book is about. We got
Do you think?
about 5 minutes left before we get, but anything we want
Okay.
to get to before we get to open it up to the people? And I know Sister has a question, I think, but anything, Karen, we want to talk about the
Yeah,
last five
I
minutes?
did want to ask you, basically, I think that Masha Gessen's premise is that Russian society is doomed to replicate its marriage to totalitarian regimes. What about in the United States, when you're talking about the historical trauma of, major sectors of the population? Are we doomed to continue um, our racist society? Are we doomed now to be married to the kind of authoritarianism of the Trump presidency? What do you think?
We did an interview years back with Walter Brooks, Trust No Shadow After Dark. And one of the things I found strange about his book, he didn't have a happy ending. He said it's going to be worse. And I've heard people
Mhm,
predict that happening. So it's going to be hard to unwind or unring this bell. And I also
mhm,
think whoever the next president is going to pick up some of the same bad traits or habits because they have seen what Trump has done. I got to give Trump credit for being very clever at how he's gotten away with some of this and got people to drink the Kool-Aid. And so those of us who've been historically oppressed for 450 years, whether it be Native Americans, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, whoever, it's hard to come out of this kind of a funk because you got to have some purple, strategic unwinding of what happens. And as I interact with the current regime or the people I see in leadership, I don't see that you can create a certain kind of instant education or knowledge because some of them have the attention span of a amoeba, or the other thing is they have never written anything, they're not into it. And so I think it's going to take a lot more to get us going forward. And Elijah Ali used to say, if we're going to change, it's going to be a divine intervention or a rude awakening. And I don't know that. I have to be fatalistic because I do believe in what Jesse Jackson about keep hope alive. And we struggle for that next generation. But again, the odds are against us right now because when I walk in all these institutions, you name them, and I don't see a black face, or if I see them sitting at a cardboard in the corner, I don't have a lot of hope. But again, I know I got to keep doing something so that we can help that next generation, so that they can find it better than we found it. But this guy's unwinding that. He's putting that clock backwards for us.
If we were going to make a continuing book club, starting with this book, what other have you thought of any other books that this one reminds you of that you think would make, be good to add to our list, and have people start to think about?
We did one on the Some of Us, and I'll have to come back and repeat that because I think these are practitioners where they read a book. I mean, they write a book and they give you some outward things. And just recently, Karen, I saw there are people who belong to book clubs. There's a couple of book clubs in Omaha, I think, and nothing comes out and they sit around. They're more social groups, but book clubs that can transform you to do something with it. So, in other words, if you're going to go to a protest, what do you do with that? If your goal is just go and stand on the corner and have a flag or show something and then go home and do your same old oppressive stuff to other people, you've kind of, it's like urinating in the wind, as we would say. I'll use that metaphor. But I think if we're going to do a good book or we're going to write it, you want it to transform you to do something to make you a different person. And I know religious people tell me their holy books do that for them. Sometimes I find it hard to believe. I don't see it a lot of it. But I do think we do some more books. It's going to be those kind of books. And there's a book I'm reading right now about an African American woman who's an activist, and she's very good at writing, but also good at saying some projects she's working on. I don't have her name in front of me, but like I say, she's one of those persons that might be a good book. But again, you want to make sure the book is that other people can read it because sometimes many of our families in our community don't read at an adequate level. They're illiterate, and again, the school system puts them out like that. We got a couple of more minutes, and I want to ask you a different question, Karen, and I think it's related to this whole conversation. If you had to rate this book on a scale of 1 to 10, and I know you had a lot of books in your collection. By the way, there was somebody on the internet that says, I got 70,000 books in my library. I know you didn't read all those 70,000. But anyway, my question is, how would you rate this book on a scale of 1 to 10, just in terms of your edification of reading books and so on?
Yeah. So, first I was thinking 9 out of 10 because
Oh, wow.
I don't like to give tens out of tens. But I think one of my problems with the book is really kind of getting at what you were talking about a second ago. And so maybe it's an 8 out of 10 because I wanted to have some wrap up that would talk about how to use this information in the future, if you're in a country that is going towards authoritarianism, for example. I would have liked that, or some guidance based on Masha's experience, that because Masha lives in New York now and has for years, and as a Russian American, I think has this really unique perspective and opportunity. And maybe this is in other writings of theirs, but yeah, that was what I thought was missing. Was what do we do next? How do we learn from this?
And some authors may question you and say, I wrote the book, you figure out what to do with the next. Or what's your edification? It's kind of like a colleague told me one day, when you write a letter, you want people to not throw it in the garbage can because you call them an egghead or some other
Mhm.
kind of derogatory, pejorative term. But you want them to do something with it. So maybe she's putting it at a point where she's expecting us to come up with our own action item, because there's a lot of good books we've read over the years, and we're still sat on our couches and watch sports and called audibles about plays instead of getting out in our community doing that. We're right up on our time here, and I wanted to throw it open to folks. And sister, I see you have a question there first, so let's go with yours first, and maybe you can open up your mic and talk directly about it. Sister Cynthia, are you there?
She's turning her mic off.
Oh,
There she
okay.
is.
I had, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear
Yeah.
you good.
Okay. The point I sent a little earlier is I was kind of looking forward to how these four people show up in the book. I told Ajmal I didn't read the book, but I listened to one of her 2017 lectures, and then I did a little other study. But I couldn't figure out really who these four people were. And when you said in the intro thing about the dawn of democracy, that's in the intro, it's like I still want to know who these four people were, because my memory is that they were chosen by her for particular four reasons, and that they were all in that space at that 1980s
Right.
time. So
Exactly.
that's just kind of like, who are these people? And I know there's a lot of ethnic groups out there just from other study, and I thought, I wonder if any of them represented that part of the Russian culture when the dawn of democracy came forward.
One of them is Masha. Um, and right, Ajmal
Yeah, and
isn't.
I think was there three women, three other women? Because I know she focused on a guy also, but I know she has four people who was a focus, and she used them as storytellers, almost like they did in Roots, where you got stories people to be the main protagonists or the main characters, and she's telling their stories, but she's also indirectly laying out some heavy light on us. But yeah, there was four people that she was the center of this book, and in the YouTube video she alludes to that, and their
I
names are
don't.
listed in the book.
I don't know how to pronounce their names. Lyosha or Lyosha was another major character, um, a gay man who's suffering homophobia. Zana or Jana, something like that.
And she lays out in the introduction. She lays out why she
Yeah,
thinks of so
another political activist who's like a voice for democracy. And another, so I guess there were two women and two men who were represented, and Seryoja,
Okay.
I'm probably destroying that name, a young man who um, is also, you know, having his identity suppressed. Um, so, they go in and out of prison camps. They are, taken away from their family, put back to their family, lives up and down. Masha eventually leaves Russia finally for the last time because Putin passed a law saying that uh, homosexuality was illegal. I can't remember exactly, but Masha was afraid of losing custody of their child, and so the whole family ended up leaving. So yeah, does
Sister,
that help you, Cynthia?
There's another question, but Cynthia, I want to come back to another question that you raised earlier indirectly. Um, there was the Academy Awards, or they just got the award, and one of them was nothing. It was about the education in the Soviet Union, and then of course the other Academy nominee was Alabama. They were very powerful. In this book, they talk about how controlled the education is in the Soviet Union, and I started thinking how the same thing happens in Omaha. You got 80% of the kids who are African American, not people of color. You go in the libraries and the books and so on. There are not really many books about people of color nor teachers. So the book outlines how you control education, and that nominated Academy Award that won, Nobody's, and it talks about education in the Soviet Union. It's a documentary. And then, of course, Alabama was about the prison system that was smuggled out. And Cynthia, you brought that to my attention also. But this book is related to that documentary that won. There's another question here, too. What would it be like, someone asked, what would you like to happen next? What would this book be like? In other words, I guess that's a magic wand question, Karen. What would you like to happen after all this, after, and
Reading the book.
a magic wand after
Yeah, I think that the book really articulates well what the dangers are. And so if we can learn where we are on that authoritarianism to totalitarianism scale and figure out some levers for change, I think. But in terms of how more can use this book to address racism, I think it's to um, talk about how the any levers that we can discover. I mean, this is the interesting thing is Russia is a majority white country, right? So the oppressed people of Russia are different than the oppressed people of the United States. And so we need to think about what lessons do apply to us, which ones don't apply. And I don't have a great answer to that. It's a really good question. I don't,
I have an answer to it, and I
yeah,
know that's just by human nature. And again,
yeah.
me being the wise one, I know what I'm knowing. Every institution should have an ombuds person who is independently hired to watch and look over us. And so, for example, you go into the medical institution, the medical industrial complex. Someone has to be there who can push back, who's not afraid to be a whistleblower. Mike Foley and Lincoln showed the governor's got some corrupt stuff going on. The police department is evil and dirty as it is in Omaha, Keystone Cops, being caught on sexual harassment, racial stuff, you name it. And we need somebody who can be inside systems to hold them accountable. The education system, Omaha Plantation Schools, you look at the outcomes, you don't know what if organization is good, you should have good products from that. And so I think you need somebody who has a wherewithal, I want to say a sense of hubris, who can challenge system, because again, we easily get caught up in a group thought. And I've talked to people where they're afraid of losing their jobs. And some people don't believe that they have freedom of speech in this country. Even those who are retired. I've talked to some retired African American educators after so many years, and they're afraid to speak up because they don't want to mess up their $900,000 retirement checks or whatever. But at the end of the day, you would think we would have a way to have somebody push back, and also the media. The media is as racist you get. So we need a media that shows all parts of life, and not the kind of bubblegum media that reports only a certain kind of news that's jaundiced or just, I want to say, just milk toast or whatever. So I would say you got to have a check and balance. And, again, one of the things that I've learned over the years is I need somebody to remind me when my shoes are not tied, and again, we need that. So I would say make sure there's a checks and balances and not the rubber stamp Congress and the judicial system we currently have to go along and get along. Again, that's one of my suggestions.
And from the perspective of more, what can we as an organization do? I think it's publicizing the shocking so it doesn't become normalized. It would be, holding institutions' feet to the fire, like we've done, with some of the educational institutions in Omaha. And because the, allowing institutions that I mean, Nebraska is a small state, so fewer than 2 million people. There's an opportunity really to shame shame these institutions so that they don't just bow to political pressure. And I think Yeah, you talked about dissent, Ajmal. I think that n not allowing the suppression of dissent, we've got nothing to lose. You can't suppress more because we have nothing to lose. You can't take away our money. You can't take away our jobs
You
because
can't take away what you ain't got, right?
most of us are retired. So, so we actually have an incredibly important role as dissenters, and as an organization that can hold organizations and institutions accountable, and ask them to be more transparent on a regular basis.
And for example, I call Habitat for Humanity. I know the director's making over $300,000 annual salary. Looking at the 990, you don't see them in the community. I call one of their African American workers, McPherson, about maybe a week ago. No return call. How do you exist in the community? You won't talk to African American people, or you're afraid of them, even when you're one of us. So part of it, I would say, Karen, is we got to be able to make people accountable with system, because if you don't get the widgets out, you can't make these diamonds and do the things we need to do. So at some point, we need to remind people the Constitution is real and supposed to protect some of us. But right now, this administration is getting in a situation where people are even afraid to push back. I mean, you can't get the Trumps of the world unless he didn't have his collaborators. And then another thing I would say, Karen, we are a group. We belong to collective. We can't do this as individuals. And I think that goes back to the cult of personality conversation. When that
Mhm.
person disappears from the legislative process or whatever, who's going to fill the gap? Not the people who got their hands in the cookie jars or on the take or payroll of people who are against our interests as a community or as a state. And so, yeah, those are all important issues and questions. But at the end of the day, if you don't have dissent or you don't have things that we supposed to have, then we become like the oligarchies of Putin and his henchmen and the evil people in that regime. Other feedback, other questions. This is feedback. I do not hear you.
Anybody on Facebook who wants to post a question in Facebook?
Or comment.
Love to hear from you.
Hey, Karen, going back to an earlier question I was posing, I didn't get a chance to get into it. I noticed that in the book they use the word traitors, and the word traitors is different for different people. And again, she talked about different ideology. Like if you belong to one party and you switch over, they called you a traitor. And my question somewhat is, how do we define traitors? In other words, some people think a traitor is somebody in the war, turning into work for the other side, but we're talking about ideologies and concept. And I find that kind of interesting to use the word traitor. If I'm a Republican, I become a Democrat, am I really a traitor?
Right.
Can we change our mind? And so they use traitor, and they get very angry and mad there and even hurt people because it's an oligarchy or it's an authoritarian mentality. But traitor has a different terms, and I didn't understand the traitor thing in that
Yeah.
context. We call it traitor.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's the problem with authoritarian regimes is they can call anybody a traitor and define treason anytime they want. Right now, my understanding of treason in the United States is that it has to do with this concept of levying war against the United States, and that's the phrase, or this other phrase, which is adhering to the enemies by giving them aid and comfort. So, that usually is about armed open action against the government. But Trump already back in November last year, he repeatedly misused the term traitor to describe those six members of Congress, the Democratic members of Congress, after they made a video that was urging military members to refuse illegal orders. And Trump said that their message was seditious, that they should be arrested and put on trial. So I feel like the, again, in terms of being a playbook for the Trump administration, Putin's Russia is doing a darn good job of, giving some instructions on exactly what to do. And it's calling people traitors and then putting them in jail and killing them for being traitors when you've just made something up and scared people out of dissenting and out of basically doing their jobs.
You know, the other thing is Tucker Carlson is catching flack for interviewing different people, and they're calling him a traitor. And I saw the CIA and the FBI want to bring him up on charges just for raising some issues. Again, it shows you the fascism of these entities. But the other thing I think related to that is in our own state of Nebraska, we got a governor who called people names and say certain things because somebody disagreed with him, whether it be a liberal or whatever. And so he has that same kind of sucking up to the Trump administration and following the same kind of a so on. I like to see the Department of Education in Nebraska abolished. I mean, they don't have a person of color of any substance, and I know the one who was there just retired, but we didn't miss that person because they didn't do anything for us collectively. But again, you got these people who have these white supremacy mentality. They don't do anything for our community. They don't come in our community. And why do we pay taxes when we make up a significant number of our state population in our city? So my point, when they use the word traitor, they're talking about word traitors here. Over there, they're talking about where the same thing, but they can hurt you over there for just saying it. But we're starting to move in that area in this country when you see the CIA and the FBI and them joining forces. And of course, ICE has done that, where those two people were killed. And, you know, black people have been killed like that for years. And you got a county attorney in Douglas County like saying they're not guilty, the police officers, when they haven't had the grand jury found. And I always like to say they like to have the grand jury usually the Friday before a football game or right before a sports event. And they meet for like 30 seconds or 30 minutes. And he makes all his plea. And then again, they find that they exonerate these police officers who've been shooting people who are sitting in cars or got their hands up or laying on the ground. But again, welcome to Omaha, Nebraska. We have about some minutes here. Somebody has another comment coming in. How did the four people resist? Was the law passed that children of gay parents could be abducted at reason? Okay. I think there was some group, if I remember right, there was some group torture and things that happened that they took people aside and just beat them up, and the authorities looked the other way. The police officers encouraged it, kind of like what happened in the Klans back in the day, and even sometime today, I guess, where the police officer do some horrible stuff to gay people or families, and they basically looked the other way and let them get away with it. And I do think there was like kidnapping type things that happened that she alluded to in the book. And so people were always scared when their relatives came out in the Russian society. And again, it's like here, lynchings happen for many times, many thousands and thousands, over 5,000 documented, probably 10,000 over the years. But people didn't know because it was kept secret by the folks who were doing it. But yeah, in Russia, they do some horrible, horrific things to people who have different sexual orientation. And the officers and people in the authority look the other way. In actual fact, they sometimes encourage it. And she alludes to that in the book.
Yeah. And that law that Cynthia mentioned is ultimately why Masha Gessen and left Russia finally, ultimately, permanently.
You see the points in it?
Hmm? Oh,
Go to read that, Karen. That's funny. That's a
I
good
don't think I'll read this book. Too many parallels to what is developing here regarding resisting. Talk to us a little bit more about that, Cynthia. What do you mean by too many parallels regarding resisting? It's like too close to home?
Right. I'm one of those who is, I don't think I'll go to the No Kings rally, but I do other forms of resisting. And I often am like looking over my shoulder to see who's going to turn me in. And help with the citizenship project in South Omaha with Perla over at the Heartland Worker Center. I could be I, I could be accused of trying to get citizens in our country that don't belong here that are being deported. So I mean, it's like it only increases a low level of anxiety, which I think is probably what was keeping a lot of people quiet in Russia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, it's like I have a hard time watching scary movies. I do not like watching gore and cutting blood and stuff. So I understand kind of like sometimes you don't be a part of that. And it's just sometimes I remember.
Osmo, those are movies. You know, this is not a movie. What's going on in this country is too real, unless if it's one of those strange things I sent you. That somebody AI generated this weird fake stuff. I mean, but there's too much, there's a lot of real stuff going on, and people witness it and they try to speak or resist, and then they get thrown in the detention somewhere and have all these law fees to pay.
Speaking of that, I was told a story that happened within the past month where there's a person who works at an institution, like I mentioned, institution, was traveling to western Nebraska and went in a gasoline station. And the person told them they couldn't come in because they're the wrong color. The person walked out and left it at that. And I asked the person, "Did you report it?" And I found out there was no reporting of this gasoline station. They were not served a person of color in Nebraska. And when the first story was first told me, I thought it happened like, years ago during the civil rights movement in the 1960s or so. And I said, no, it happened recently. So we got situations that go on in our community and people are afraid to report it because they don't really push back by law enforcement. Again, we know we had a Klan member on the state patrol and Ernie Chambers got that person off. But, there's a lot of horrific things that are going on and people look the other way. It's a blue line that they follow. And, the things going on in school systems and we don't always have people who can tell because they're afraid of losing their job and their livelihood. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. Other feedback, other reaction. About 10 minutes left or so, 11 minutes left on the show. Anyone else? I do recommend the book. I like it a lot because I think all you do is change the names to protect the innocent. And there's a lot of stuff that you can just drop some names. And I mean, somebody can go back and do the research how many discrimination cases the city has lost or the county or whatever or settled out of court. And I think this reflects the same kind of mentality that happens in this so-called democracy. We have a mirror that's more bent on, taking pictures, no substance, no public policy statements, nothing. But I just think we got to deal with all that. Somebody else has another comment here?
I don't think we need to stay on camera if we're not getting any
Okay.
questions.
Okay, if that's the case, Karen, any other final comments you would make about the book or anything before we close out? And also, I would just want to share some of the upcoming events we have coming too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd love to hear what's happening next. So I guess I think of the book as kind of a warning for us and maybe getting us to think a little bit about how what happened in Russia could happen here. What are some of the characteristics that are reflected in what's happening now? The erosion of civil liberties, mass surveillance, consolidation of executive power, weaponization of the state against, the federal government against the states and against the people. Um, and think about what it is we can do on an individual basis and on an organizational basis. As Ajmal was saying, we can't really do this alone. We have to work in community. Um, so, how about you, Ajmal? You said you liked the book. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you score it?
I would score it at 8, and I wouldn't put it high because I put the Malcolm X book as like 10. So I would say high for me is an 8 because she elucidated, or how can I say, she offers some stuff that I didn't know. And again, it's a genre, or because I don't read books about Russia and other countries like the Eastern European countries, but this was a book that kind of opened my eyes, and I like the fact that she's a journalist, and so she writes real clear, and she also reminds me of Isabel Wilkerson, where she uses vignettes of other people to tell a story, so she's not always a storyteller. But the fact that she's been writing for so many years, I see how she's built up her skill set. I think she's very multicultural, and I like that a lot also. So I would give it an 8, and I also would recommend it because I think it does reflect, as Sister alluded to, some things that we experience as ethnic and racial minorities in the United States. And also, it can be a little bit challenging, folks, trying to keep track of the 4 characters and some of the historical things you jump into. But like I say, it's a stretch opportunity for some of us who have cognitive deficiencies or limited cranial capacity. So the more that we learn about these kind of cultures and people, the more we can be better people and understand it's about ideals and not issues. Ideals versus, issues where you kind of be stagnated. So it's a good book. And I think we got to do a better job of helping people to know we have not only freedom of speech, hopefully, but freedom of ideas or freedom of thought. And so this book, I think, does a great job. And also gives you contrast of what we will become if we continue on this present orange man in the White House.
What's coming up for more?
What I want to allude to is we're going to have a series of events coming up. We're going to have somebody who's I think from Pakistan, Muslim, and a Jewish person talk about what's going on in Palestine a little bit coming up in about a week or so. We're also going to have an African American historian We've had Adam Fletcher Sass, so we're going to have an African-American historian come on and talk about some of the writing related to the book that deals with racism. We're also going to talk about a person who's done a lot with grief and talk about the whole issue of grieving and what you go through. Doris Bush has talked about, she's bought 300 books and passed out people who've lost loved ones. We'll talk about that. Also, the African American Commission just appointed a new executive director, and he's agreed to come on and let us challenge and raise questions to him, give more information what's going on in the state and what they're about. And then, of course, one of the things we really want to push on is Ben Salazar is going to talk about some of the challenges with ICE and immigration and the inability of some of the Latinos to move to the front and center, as we talked about in the African American community. And he's going to give kind of his overview of some things he sees that needs to happen. So we're going to continue to bring people to the table because our local media will not give many of these individuals the kind of fanfare that they need to share their stories in our respective communities. So we're looking forward to bring more people to the table. And we also look for suggestions that people can raise ways that we can talk about issues. And I know some people are afraid to talk about this, but our goal is to help increase awareness level so that more and more people can be engaged in what we call our democracy. So on that note, I would like to say, may the force be with you, Baroko, and join us the next time we do another program.
Thanks.